Hello and welcome to B2B More Human. I'm Ali Williams, co-founder of creative agency Markmaking, and this is the podcast where we get under the skin of the best in B2B. The place where we dive deep into what separates the winners from the thanks for comings, with conversations brimming with insight, inspiration, and practical guidance to help you take your B2B brand building game to the next level. Today's guest is Richard Chataway. Richard and I were introduced about a year ago, and I immediately thought Richard would make a fantastic guest. Where our perspective on what makes certain B2B brands outperform others is based on experience and witnessing firsthand the common characteristics, Richard brings the science, specifically behavioural science. Richard is Director of Behavioural Science at Concentrix Catalyst, the founder of the consultancy Communication Science Group, and a former board member of the Association for Business Psychology. He's also the author of the acclaimed book, The Behaviour Business, How to Apply Behavioural Science for Business Success. It's bustling with practical insight that we'll be getting into. Richard has featured on BBC Radio and in HR Magazine, delivered training at Google and Ofcom, and is a visiting lecturer for City University and Bayes Business School. Over his career, Richard has successfully addressed behavioural challenges as varied as getting people to stop smoking, join the armed forces, pay for university tuition, submit their taxes, buy flat pack furniture, and take public transport. Working in various senior strategic communications roles, Richard has advised clients such as IKEA, Google, Pfizer, Gambleware, ING, Channel 4, NS&I, ITV, Kimberly-Clark, HSBC, and NatWest Group. I could go on and on, but I think you'll have got the picture. Richard knows his onions. So let's dive in and peel away a few layers to reveal ideas and insight you can apply to give your B2B brand a competitive edge today. Hello, Richard, and a very warm welcome to the B2B More Human podcast. I'm delighted that you've been able to join us. How are things with you?
Yeah, good. It's great to be here. Yes, it's a beautiful sunny Friday morning, so everything good.
Perfect conditions. Perfect. So, what I'd like to talk a lot about today naturally comes out of your book, which I have to say I've pored over and thoroughly enjoyed. And I'm holding up a copy of the book. Obviously, anybody listening to this can't see that. But Richard's book is called The Behaviour Business. And as I say, I thoroughly enjoyed it, Richard. And when I was thinking about what we could talk about if we're giving ourselves half an hour for a chat, it became quite a challenge to whittle down the things that might be nice to expand on and explore a little bit further, to the point that I actually ended up writing a list, which I also have beside me as well, to make sure that I remember which things I think would be particularly interesting. There are quite a few things on that list, so we might just have to see how we go for time. But first of all, what I particularly enjoyed about the book, or found valuable in the book, was that we've obviously worked with B2B businesses now for nearly 30 years, and B2B More Human is born of that direct experience and what we've seen and witnessed amongst the B2B organizations that seem to consistently outperform the rest. What your book did for me was provide some of the science behind that. So things that we were, as I say, just observing, there is clearly a lot more behind that. So one of the things, and it's obviously a theme throughout the book, is around the emotional nature of decision making. And I think whilst there are still some organizations out there that perhaps fail to recognize that it's a more emotional based activity than it is rational, what I found particularly insightful was this idea that actually in B2B, that emotional element is actually greater than it is in a B2C environment. And I thought it'd be great if we could start perhaps by expanding a little bit on that and discussing the implications of that for B2B
Sure.
in particular.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about the book. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I think and found it useful. And yeah, to your point, the opening line of my book is if you're a business, you're in the business of behaviour, and understand human behaviour is critical to any form of business success. And as you say, one of the fundamentals of human behavior, what distinguishes us from robots, for example, is the fact that we do have emotions, and emotions play a significant part in our decision making and how we make decisions. And one of the ways in which that plays out, and that distinction that people often make between B2C and B2B, for example, is the perception that somehow decisions we make in the B2B, in a B2B context, are devoid of emotion, or somehow, we put on our work clothes, or we jump on a Teams or a Zoom call to talk to our colleagues, and suddenly we become different people. And the heuristics, which are mental rules of thumb, and behavioural biases that we use to navigate the world every day and make decisions that are ingrained through millennia of evolution of ourselves as a species, as humans, somehow they disappear when we are making those decisions in a business context, which of course is basically nonsense. And also, it is provably untrue from the evidence base that we have. So, to your point, are decisions in the B2B context more emotional than B2C? Well, it's difficult to kind of quantify that, I guess, but the evidence points to the fact that it does. There was a big study conducted by Gartner and Google a few years ago, where they went to over 3,000 decision makers in a wide range of sectors, and it was 27 different industries and sectors they looked at. And they looked at what determined the decision they were making in a business context. And they found that the vast majority, I think it was 80% of, or in 80% of cases, the personal value of the decision, so the value to the individual making the decision, trumps the business value in terms of what drove that decision.
Yeah.
So, is this something that is going to benefit me as an individual, whether that's professionally or in other ways, more than it is the business? Now, if you think about it, that doesn't make, you think about it in a purely rational way, that doesn't make sense. You're needing to look well for a business, the business employs you, you should be making the best possible decision for that business. But the reality is we are people, we have our own, have our own drives and motivators. We have these behavioural biases that guide our decision making on a daily basis. And as you say, the evidence is that behavioural science gives us those quite emotional. Particularly, we have a drive towards avoiding loss. So, potentially, we're quite risk averse in the decisions that we make. And therefore, that is a key driver of decision making, whether we're making those decisions in a business context or outside of business. And if you think about the consequences of the decisions we make in the business context, they're potentially pretty significant. You can't buy the wrong thing in a supermarket for dinner tomorrow night. The consequences of that is pretty minor. It's not going to be something that is going to be hugely detrimental to my future well-being necessarily, unless, it's contaminated food or something like that. But whereas if I make a bad decision at work, I could lose my job, then I could lose my house, my income. The consequences are pretty dire. And this drive towards loss aversion, the fact that we are always faced by the fear of loss when the equivalent chance of gain, which is a behavioural bias that has been proven countless times through academic study and experimentation. That applies in a business context. Is this decision something that I can defend to my bosses? Is it something that will, potentially deliver personal value to me in terms of career progression, in terms of, fulfilling the objectives that I have in my role? Over and above, actually, isn't necessarily the best decision for the business. I thought, often those two things will coincide, but in a lot of cases they won't necessarily. So that emotional element that comes into it, if I make the wrong decision here, I'm going to lose my job, and my fear of that, which is an emotional driver, is really important and something that's underestimated, and we kind of, I think in a lot of cases we forget, and we think that actually, as I say, when people get into the work context, they somehow become emotionless robots, and they're making decisions purely based on, a very spreadsheet around what the best or worst consequences would be. I mean, one of the most famous articulations for this in the kind of B2B marketing context is the old slogan, "No one got fired for buying IBM." You know
You
what I
beat me
mean?
to it, Richard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's a perfect encapsulation of this concept of defensive decision making. It's sometimes called, which is is the decision that I can stand by and sit in a meeting and tell people why I've made this decision, and everyone will nod and agree and go, okay, that was a safe choice. Versus actually, maybe we should take a punt on this. They might care, but in most cases they won't. Or in a lot of cases they won't, and that's a much riskier position because your job is on the line.
Yeah.
That's a stark example. Obviously, most decisions we make in this context won't necessarily be faithful to our career prospects or our jobs, but that bias that we have is very powerful, and as I say, there is an increasing amount of evidence that actually those primarily emotionally based biases that we have play a really important role in these people.
And do you think you touched on it there? Loss aversion, gain maximizing. By nature, then, as humans, as people, in purchasing scenarios, we are about product satisficing rather than product maximizing. If something is good enough, that's good enough.
Yes.
Because I find that really interesting, because particularly in B2B, again, in our experience, a lot of B2B organizations put, rightly so in many ways, a lot of emphasis on the detail. So I'm thinking of an example recently where a client of ours was talking about, well, we've now got more than 24 features. We need to tell everybody about these features. Every one of these features actually means our product is better than our competitor's product. And I'm wondering whether that's them losing sight of the fact that actually their buyers are operating on it. Is this a good enough? Will I not get fired for making this purchase?
Yes.
And if they better understood that, they might think differently about how they did market those products and how they did communicate those products.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to kind of take a step back from that, to kind of clarify the distinction, for those who might not be familiar with the term. So there was an economist called Herbert Simon who coined this distinction between satisficing and maximizing. And he was one of the first people to sort of, I guess, to bring in some of these insights around how people make decisions in the real world into the field of economics, and which later became economics, and as they're more commonly referred to as behavioral science. And this distinction between satisficing and maximizing is a really powerful one, a really interesting one. And actually, I just had a conversation this morning about it in relation to a client challenge, because I still think it's something that people don't use enough in terms of when thinking about how it purchases is made, whether that's in B2C or B2B. And what we mean by satisficing and maximizing is that satisficing is exactly as you say, is when someone has gone, there's enough here to make me comfortable in making this decision. I don't have all the information. I have enough information to say that provider A is better than provider B, so I'm going to go with provider A in terms of choosing a product or service. I suppose maximizing the decision is where someone is going, I want to gather all the possible information that I can, understand every possible variable, every possible feature and benefit, and therefore and make the optimal decision. Now, the reality is that there's very rarely a situation where we have all the information available to us to allow us to make a choice maximizing decision. So in the vast majority of cases, we will make a satisfying decision, and in most cases, that's good enough for us. And in fact, actually, there's quite interestingly, there's a lot of evidence and interesting. There's a great book called The Paradox of Choice by a guy called Barry Schwartz, who talks about this, where to some extent the secret to happiness is to be comfortable good enough in a lot of circumstances, because you can never get all the information. So trying to choice maximize is just a fool's errand and will drive you to some degree towards insanity. Whereas choice satisficing is a much more comfortable psychological state to be in. So if you think about it in a B2B context, exactly as you say, if you are assuming that your consumers are choice maximizers, you want to bombard them with all the information that they need in order to make that decision. And the reality is that most people will be choice satisfied, and therefore there might be just 2 or 3 key things you need to communicate, which gives them enough for them to go, actually, that meets what I need. I'm not going to waste another hour or days potentially looking around to find something else. And bear in mind, obviously, a lot of decisions that we make, particularly in a business context, are like speed as much as we think of. How quickly can I get this up and running, whatever it is I'm buying. And, that once you've hit that criterion, the key criterion that they need, fine, they're ready to hit the button and make the purchase. And, again, we had this conversation with the client, having a conversation relationship clients today that we're working with, who are, very concerned that a lot of their customers are very price driven, and they're finding that they're getting a lot of customer contacts, and they're basically in a kind of a negotiation scenario with a lot of their customers whereby, they feel it's very price driven, it's quite a commoditized market. And so, they tailored their customer experience around that to be very much about, or you want to get a good deal, we're going to give you a good deal, and almost in a kind of adversarial positioning with their customers. What we're trying to move them forward is just to say, most customers don't want that. They don't want to spend their time searching for multiple different options. They don't want to be constantly negotiating and haggling out price. Well, reach a price point that feels like fair value, but but they can post-rationalize their decisions to purchase and meet a satisfying criteria. And that's true with the vast majority of consumers. You need to tick a couple of boxes for them, so they can go comfortably, go to their bosses in a business context to say, I bought this because, it meets the key criteria that we have. It's a fair price. Let's not waste another week, 2 weeks, searching around to find all the information we possibly can to justify this decision, because those 2 to 3 weeks we've lost whatever the advantage that product gives us. So the choice satisfying maximizing features, I think, is a really interesting one. It's a great way to think about your consumers. What are the things that matter to them? What are the criteria that is driving this purchase behavior? How do we meet those? How do we demonstrate that our product meets those? And then, and that can compensate, for example, like for an issue like price. You may not be the cheapest, but if you're able to demonstrably to demonstrate that you can meet those key criteria that are driving the purchase decision, that may be enough, and people might be willing to pay a little bit of a premium accordingly.
How do you? It makes so much sense, and I find it fascinating because, as I say, with a lot of, particularly in the tech space, where there is something to get very excited about a product because it's very clever, and it can do lots of things, software platform, whatever it might be, for another business. How do you? We work hard at this to try and encourage our clients to think less about how clever it is and get carried away with communicating all of that, and not lose sight of the fact that there is a problem here that you're trying to demonstrate you are best suited to solve. Do you have a way of doing that with your clients when you're finding that they are staying steadfastly in the direction of, we just want to give them all this information because it's really clever, we've researched this, we've created this, that there's a human nature element there, isn't there, happening?
Absolutely.
That you've got to kind of extract them from as best you can.
So I guess those who watch the video will notice or can see behind me that my book has got test tubes on the cover, and the reason for that is because it's thank you. And my Ali holding out there. And the reason for that is because behavioural science is a science, and so it's based on experimentation and testing, and also behaviour is very context dependent. So what I've just said about choice maximising and satisfying is generally true.
Yeah.
But there might be some contexts in which people are choice maximisers, whether that's down to the individual characteristics of the purchaser or the category they're in. There is some evidence around some of the famous research around this, for example, that that there is a sweet spot around the number of options and choices you give people, where you want to give them enough choice that they feel that they've had been able to, make a free choice and choose the best possible option. If you give them too many choices, then people are overwhelmed and they're less likely to make a purchase decision. So there was a famous study conducted by Senior Inga in the States. They wrote a great book on this called The Art of Choosing. She and her colleagues did this study about, it was in a B2C, I think it was basically people buying jam.
Yes, I wanted to talk about this one. I love this.
And what they found was that when you gave people, so, on a rational level, you'd think the more choices you give people, the more likely, more varieties of jam you give people to try. So they're basically giving free samples of jam out in this shop of different flavors of jam. And then they monitored, whether people try, how many people tried, and then whether it led them to make a decision, whether they led them to purchase the jam as a result. And what they found was when they gave people like a lot of different varieties of jam, I think it was 25 different varieties of jam, people were much less likely to make a purchase than when they gave them like 9 varieties. I think it was a maximum of 9 was that most. So they gave them fewer choices, and that actually made people more likely to buy. And intuitively, you think the opposite is true. 25 varieties, you want to find one you like, so therefore you want. The problem was that people would try so many at the 25, they go, I don't know which one is best, and they would just walk away without making a purchase. And the same is true of features and benefits.
Okay.
You give people a long list of so many different things, they get overwhelmed and go, it's too much information for me to process. I can't make a decision on which is better. If you're also comparing multiple different providers who provide different features and benefits, it just becomes too much. And therefore, and this is one of the issues with choice maximizing, you're less likely to make a purchase.
Yeah.
And so that's a really interesting aspect of this. And as I say, it is context dependent. So, there will be some contexts where people want to choice maximize. And for example, if you are an expert, a subject matter expert, and this is something that's really important to you, you're more likely to maximize that satisfaction.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a conversation we're having with a client at the moment in the B2C space where, frankly, the product they sell is very heavily commoditized. There isn't a huge difference between providers. So what we're trying to say is people are not going to maximize in this category because it's not something that's it's a necessary purchase, but it's not something that people are very passionate about or experts in. So they're less likely to maximize the result. Now, in a B2B context, you might say, well, if there might be something I'm an expert, but how often are the purchase decisions that people are making in a business context something that they are so expert and passionate about, they're going to spend weeks, days, poring over every possible product feature and benefit. And, and there is a if you want a physiological aspect of this, which is, the evidence is the maximum number of things we can keep in our short-term memory at any time is about 9.
Okay.
So once you've given people more than 9 pieces of information to process at the same time, we get confused, we start forgetting stuff, we get overwhelmed. So, again, it just reinforces that in most cases, people are going to be choice satisfied. In most cases, people want less information rather than more, and they want to make sure there's going to be 2 or 3 key criteria in their head that is going to drive that purchase decision, and you need to tick those boxes for them to be comfortable enough with that decision and be able to justify that decision. And it's about finding out what those things are, and then appealing to those. That's really the goal of marketing is what are the drivers of these purchase decisions in this context, and how does our products meet those, and then really hammering those home. So, again, to your point about the product features and benefits, we did some work a few years ago for a financial services company. They were having trouble converting sales. It was very good at driving things to their website. We did what we call a condition audit, which is our tool for conducting a sort of behavioural analysis and understanding the blockers and barriers to the behaviour of the website. And we said, forget all these product features and benefits, because basically people have to scroll down 3 times to pay for the see the apply online button
Yeah.
because they have to read through all this kind of features and benefits.
Yeah.
Well, the apply online, you could keep that information there. We'll put the apply online button there first.
Yeah.
There's probably quite a lot of people that go to the website already have the intention to buy the product.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then they get there and they're like, well, God, this is just too much, and they go off and do something else. And that's exactly what happened. We moved the apply online button to the top of the page, changed the colour, changed the wording of it to appeal to some other behavioural biases, and it instantly increased click-through by over 50% on that website. It just goes to show that we need busy, complex lives, and then often less is more when it comes to information.
That's brands getting in their own way, isn't it? I think at times.
Absolutely.
And it's something you said there about this client you just mentioned operating in a marginal market, or a market where there's very little to differentiate the products. You make a point in the book about actually sometimes the initial thought is we need to change the product, when actually it's a lot easier, more efficient, cheaper, quicker to change perceptions of the product. And that can have, in fact, I guess if a lot of the goal here when you're dealing with satisfying or good enough solutions is to get to a level of trust and confidence in the easiest way, in the less time intensive, costly way. So that idea of changing perceptions, how can you do that in a market where the products are very much like for like? Are there particular techniques that you draw on?
Yeah. So I think, one of the simplest ways to articulate this, and one of the ways that I talk about in the book, is that in my episode I talk about heuristics, which is a technical term for mental rules of thumb. So, what are most decisions that we make? As I said, we don't have all the information available. We live in any case, we live in a world where there might be competing information or imperfect information that we're working from to make a decision, and or incomplete information. And so we use these rules of thumb to help us navigate the world and to help us make good enough decisions. And the simple way to think about the role of brand, for example, is as a heuristic. If you ask people, about whether it's a massive brand like Coca-Cola or something, to name, 2 or 3 things about that brand, 2 or 3 words they associate with the brand, most people would be able to do that. And there'd probably be some consistency around that. So a brand like Coca-Cola, people would say red, or they'd say, reference the famous logo, or, the cat, the look and feel of the cat, for example. And that's something that obviously Coca-Cola has spent billions and billions of dollars over many, many years to establish those associations with their brand. The way it works is it basically creates a heuristic association with Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And therefore, when people are in decision, they have an option to deploy Coca-Cola or another drink brand, those associations will work as a mental shortcut to help them make any really nice purchases. And so the same way, if you're in a heavily commoditized market, it's about thinking about what are those associations that benefit your brand over the other brands in that category, and therefore building that heuristic. When people think of your product, what are the associations that they have? Mm-hmm. Some of those associations may be subconscious, so maybe things that actually people can't articulate. But if they're positive and they benefit you, then once you've built those associations, then it will help you make those purchases, and it will help people purchase your products over and over again. So that's a kind of the way to I think to think about it in terms of the role that your brand plays, and particularly the associations that you build with your brand in a heavily commoditized market.
Yeah.
And some of those associations can be, they can be fairly what's the word? Nebulous, or they can be not necessarily, certainly not rational. Obviously, dealing with those emotional drivers of behavior, As I say, the colour red, if you think about it in the drinks category, Coca-Cola has effectively owned the colour red for a very long time in that category. And, if you said drinks brand red to most people, the first thing they think of would be Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
No, you say, well, how does that help them drive purchase of that brand? Well, in a supermarket, it stands out on the shelf and is noticeable and drives people to that and helps them as a heuristic to help buy that brand. In a B2B category, I don't know, I'm trying to think of some brands that were mentioned IBM earlier, for example, or the famous Sonic Sting that Intel used, for example. And that is an association that people have with that product. It helps them identify the brand, and therefore, it helps them with making that easy good enough purchase decision for consumers. So I think that's the advice I would give for brands in the commoditized category is how do you build distinctive associations?
Yeah.
And I think there's quite a big debate in the marketing community at the moment, or has been for several years, about differentiation versus distinctiveness.
Yes.
I'm not getting into the ins and outs of that here, but I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Is you can't be distinctive without being differentiated.
Yeah.
So you think your category, there's nothing really to differentiate products in your category, or nothing substantial. That doesn't necessarily matter. You can still stand out and be distinctive from the other category, other brands in the category. And there's history with products that have triumphed, if you want to call it that, through being distinctive without necessarily being differentiated.
I think one of my favourite examples of that, which I used in a workshop this week, actually, to land a point with some intermediary mortgage lenders around that very thing, differentiation versus distinction. And I can't remember, it may have been your mentor, Rory Sutherland. I've read it in one of his books, but somebody used the example of Domestos as a cleaning product, using a line that everybody knows kills all known germs dead. And that particular verbal asset, lots of people recognize and remember, ignoring the fact that every other product in that category kills all known germs dead. So I think that's a nice example of fundamentally there is no difference in what's in the bottle and what you're buying. Exactly. So that as heuristics, and I think you use the term also in your book that I really liked, because people have lots of definitions for brands, but I think you used a collection of memories, and that again I think would resonate with a lot of people.
I think the simplest way of thinking about it is when people are in a situation where they have the option of purchasing your brand versus others, what are the things that they bring to mind? What are the associations that they have in that context? And you need to make sure you build those associations, that mental associations, in a way that leads them, is likely to lead them to buy your product over the others, your brand over the others in that category. And that's the essence of marketing.
And unfortunately for agencies like ourselves, mark making, it's a big tick in the box for creativity, isn't it? It supports the business case for creativity. We work with a lot of clients who don't have a Coca-Cola budget. Not many. I'm not sure many brands have a Coca-Cola budget. But if you're working in B2B, and maybe it's at a larger SME scale, and you're trying to educate around the importance of heuristics and through that the importance of creating a palette of distinctive brand assets and elevating distinction as much as you possibly can, whilst looking to be as meaningfully different as you can, also being as memorable and as noticeable as you can. Then pointing towards creativity as the superpower through which to enable the maximization of the distinctiveness. It's a helpful piece of the argument or the business case.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't want to emphasise that it's a question of budget either too much. That as you say, creativity will help you, help you maximize the value from what budget you have.
Yeah.
So the more creatively distinctive you are, the more powerful you get, and the more bang for your buck you'll get in immediate terms. But also, there are ways to be distinctive without needing to spend the earth. And in many ways, for example, if your competitors are all advertising in the same channels, then you're not going to be distinctive by being in those channels as well.
Yeah.
If you can find other routes to your audience, that will drive more distinctiveness by doing that. So those may be cheaper options. As an example, I did in my book of a big launch campaign for a financial services brand that I worked on, and we identified that no one in that category was using out-of-home advertising. They were all advertising on TV. And so to launch that brand, we went with large format outdoors. Don't get me wrong, it isn't cheap, but it's significantly cheaper than TV. And so we were able to kind of maximize our reach and our cut through and distinctiveness in the category at a much lower price or lower cost than we would have otherwise. And that proved to be hugely successful. There's great products as well, which obviously helped, but and they're very creative. But all of those things in combination meant that we achieved the distinctive terms that we needed for an incredibly successful launch. And so it's not a Coca-Cola I use as an example simply because it is probably the most distinctive and well-recognized brand in the world. So it will everyone will understand the analogy, but it's not you don't need Coca-Cola's budgets to achieve that impact.
I think you used the financial services case study. I remember that from the book as also an example of, you talk about something, a term that I wasn't familiar with previously, costly signaling, and actually, and just the perceptions generated purely by virtue of a big, high-profile campaign.
Yes.
The effects of it giving a sense of security, reassurance, and actually, then you do go on to make the point, and I think you use that particular example to say that we didn't have the budgets that other the financial competitors had, but we found a way actually to give the impression of costly signaling through big, impressive outdoor, coupled with, of course, alongside that costly signaling element, it sounded in that particular case study that a huge amount of emphasis was also put on distinctive brand assets.
Absolutely.
And that combination clearly worked.
Yes, absolutely. So in that case, then it was IMG Direct. If anyone remembers that brand when it launched, it's sort of been.
I think everyone's going to remember the life ring.
Yeah, exactly. So brilliant distinctive assets. The use of colour orange, the advertising really stood out. And it really worked brilliantly. And as you said, that large format outdoor that we used to launch the product, which was unique for the category. Costly signaling is a really interesting concept. It's actually something that comes from kind of evolutionary biology. Rory Sullivan, who you mentioned earlier, who wrote Forwards in the book and is friend and mentor to me, he has a great phrase for this, which is a flower is a wheat with an advertising budget. And that's effectively what costly signaling is all about. If you think about and how it's defined in evolutionary biology is the peacock feather display to attract a mate. The purpose of that is not just to be noticed. It's the fact that it's basic way of as a male peacock saying, I can produce all this wonderful feather display, which really has no purpose other than just to say I am strong, virile, I have extraneous resources and energy at ways total to produce this massive display of feathers. And Roy has another way of articulating this, which is if supermodels were simply attracted to men with expensive female supermodels, we'd all be driving trucks. With expensive vehicles, then all go out with lorry drivers. It's basically a Ferrari and a Lamborghini when you live in Mayfair, for example. It's finally impractical, but it's demonstrating that I have resources at my disposal to have this car in central London. Therefore, I am wealthy and I have, and I have more than I need. The analogy for costly signaling in marketing and advertising is that, yes, when you run a live or outdoor campaign, when you run a TV, what you're saying is, as a brand, we have permanence, we have resources, we are, in the case of that, I actually direct search, we are a safe place to put your money, which is particularly important when, in their case, they were a new brand on the market, nor had they heard of them before, and also they didn't have branches. So, one of the other ways that banks can kind of costly signal about being a safe place to put your money is by having a big brick built, imposing building on the high street. As obviously fewer and fewer of those around these days, but that was the purpose of why so many bank buildings are quite showy and quite, solid. Roman pillars, all that kind of stuff that you see in a traditional bank. It's not just because they've got lots of money, it's to say this is a safe, secure place. Particularly 150 years ago when there obviously wasn't as much marketing and advertising around. That was their way of signaling to consumers, we are, you can trust us with your money. And so, that advertising achieves some of that goal to some extent by saying we have the resources to do this. So, there's that's that concept of cross-sea signaling is basically providing that reassurance, and going back to what we were saying earlier about choice satisficing. It's a great way of doing it. I was again explaining this example earlier. If you go on compare to find an insurance provider, and you get your quotes. You might scan down the first 10 quotes or so. This is a very common behaviour that most consumers do. If there are brands in there that you recognise, which is probably going to be driven by whether they've advertised or not, you will feel really more reassurance.
Yes.
Purchasing the product from them than you will an obscure brand that you've never heard of before.
Yeah.
And this, that's going back to the point earlier. We are not completely different people when we make decisions in a B2B context. That will apply in B2B as much as it does in B2C as well. If I go to a board meeting and say, we're using this obscure provider who are based in a far-flung country that no one's ever heard of to provide this service for us, and then your superiors might go, that sounds a bit risky to me, I'm not really sure that's the right call. Whereas if you say, we've gone with this, no, I haven't got 5 flag again, it's the same principle there. And so, that is the value of marketing in general, but particularly that kind of costly signal.
Yeah, it almost kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? Because if you'd gone into that boardroom and you said, I found this other supplier, and look at all these features, look at all these things they do, look at all the things that point to them being the optimum solution for everything we need, it's still outweighed by the comfort and the security of actually, I'm familiar with that brand. I get a sense of confidence.
And just this week we've seen, the week that we're recording this, we've seen that Katoon, this put into administration. And like anyone else, I saw lots of advertising from them.
Yeah.
I even bought cars for them. They were sponsoring Premier League football teams. There was, they were trying to create that degree of permanence.
They were costly signalling. Yeah.
They were costly signalling, but obviously it wasn't sufficient for them as a business. There were other, operational reasons that makes it them going to into receivership. But they, that was, so that's an example of how, they were trying to do that in order to build permanence around the brand. And there's an example I give in my book about a hardware store brand that I worked on part of the launch job in Australia, where they were trying as hard as they could to try and build some of that costly signaling around it, but actually it wasn't matched by the product availability. The issue was that they couldn't get stores in good locations, and so they were driving demand for the products, but then consumers couldn't actually go physically visit the store. And so, in marketing terms, we talk about mental availability, physical availability. Mental availability is those associations that we talked about, those heuristics. You're driving the right mental association. But physical availability is a really simple normal. Can I actually buy this product? Is it being stocked in the right places? is it, price to some extent, so is physical availability as well, is it affordable? But, am I appearing in the search listings when people are Googling is what they need, a particular product needs.
Yeah.
That physical availability thing is something that can't be underestimated. I don't want to overplay influence of processing lead, for example. You really
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And again, I took a degree of comfort again from the fact that actually you can do so much with creativity. So with whatever resources you have as an organization, yes, costly signaling for all the reasons we've discussed is advantageous, but actually bang for buck, make your creative really, really powerful.
Absolutely.
So I said at the outset I've got quite a list here, Richard, and I think we've got through quite a few of them. I just wondered if we've got business leaders, marketing leaders, marketeers listening to this from a behavioral science perspective, is there one piece of advice that you might give those individuals in terms of how they might want to think about their marketing and how they could take its performance to the next level?
Yeah, so I think we've I guess we've touched on some of the key things here. I think one of the things if I can try and encapsulate what we talked about in one piece of advice as much as possible,
please do.
It's to remember that your consumers are human.
Yes.
And what distinguishes us as humans is this fact that the majority of decisions that we make will have an emotional, non-rational, often non-conscious aspect to it as well. So, and that's the kind of gold rule, if you want to call it that, of what behavioural science has sort of told us about the role of marketing and how we drive purchase decisions. And there's lots of things to flow after that. And that's really the premise of my book. And you said that the book is wide ranging. One of the reasons it's wide ranging is because behavioural science had value to add in the way we think about how we design products and services, how we recruit and assess people, how we get customer insights, and how we market. All of these areas of business, which are the fundamental building blocks of successful business. Behavioural science has value to add in all of those because they all relate to how we make decisions in the real world. And these human factors, uniquely human factors, have influence in all of those and are often underestimated. So, if you think about it in that way, recognizing that humans can be emotionally driven, that they can be non-rational in the decisions that they make. How does that think about how we gain insights into our consumers? What behavioral science tells us is that people's stated reason for the behavior is often very different to the real reason. So how do you unpick that? When it comes to marketing, as we've just discussed, what are actually the factors that are influencing their decision to purchase, and what are the things that are distinctive for your brand versus other brands in and influence, what are the features and benefits that really matter to people? The other stuff, that could be on page 2.
It's there for the maximizers should they require it.
Hopefully, to help rationalize the decision, because that's a key aspect as well. Often a lot of decisions we make instinctively, and then we're looking for evidence to back up the decision. So, you see this with lots of data around, the decision to hire someone who's made in the first 30 seconds, all those kind of things. That's basically what what that it speaks to. So my one piece of advice is, and there's something I'm putting in the book, which is, a kind of extension of this as well, which is, every marketing department should have a sign on the wall saying, you are not the target audience. You are not the person purchasing your product. The biases and the heuristics that you have working for an organisation are different to to what people have when they're out in the real world, when they're making the decision. We touched on this earlier, talking about what the clients are working with at the moment. The client has a perception that all of their consumers only care about price. and they're very question it's come on to best market. What we've done so far, that's not
true.
There's a lot of other factors that are influencing that decision, and what we need to do is provide reassurance to people that they are the right choice in technologies.
Yeah.
And that's how you drive that decision. So it's, that's the crux of it. It's remembering that we're dealing with people there who make decisions, not robots, not AIs.
Yeah.
That people are irrational, but there's a famous phrase that was coined by a behavioural scientist called Dan Ariely, which is people are predictably irrational.
Yes.
We can identify when when people are what these biases are when they're at play. It's about making sure that we're using our phone.
That's terrific. I've got through about 2/3 of the questions I had. We'll probably at some point have to do a follow up, Richard. Because I think the thing about that why we say we buy something versus the real reasons behind it is definitely worth exploring more, particularly again in B2B, where you perhaps don't when you're conducting market research, it tends to be more of a traditional format of ask some questions, get some responses, whereas you've got techniques like ethnography that you can use and is used commonly in lots of other spaces. Is there room for that in B2B? But perhaps that's a conversation for another time. And the other thing you just touched on there, obviously the whole essence of the theme behind all these podcasts, this idea of B2B more human, is very much centered on what it is that makes us human and human nature, and how that can, if that's better embraced, it can be more powerful in driving B2B, which historically has been the kind of less sexy, more rational side of business. And I think as part of all of that, there's lots to be unpicked around AI. Bringing it back to, just to finish off, bringing it back very, very much more human. We have a question on these podcasts that we'd like to ask the guests, and that is, what is your most notable characteristic, your most notable human trait?
Yeah, well, I guess it's a difficult one as well, because I guess what's notable to me, or what I think is notable, other people might say.
You need to ask your wife, really, don't you?
Yeah, quite indeed. Yeah. Cool. So, get back to the answer to that question, I think. And not necessarily a positive one. No, I guess one of the things that's one of the reasons why I started specialising in this field, and why I'm so passionate about it, and why I wrote my book, is because it is about human, and it helps us understand human behaviour. I remember hearing someone a little while ago saying that they felt that once they started learning about behavioural science, the world made a lot more sense, and it was almost like a superpower in terms of helping you decode certain aspects of the world, because every day we're confronted with examples and whether you watch the news or whether it's in our working lives, people behaving in ways where you're really scratching your head going, why are they doing that? What's driving the behaviour there? How can people behave like that? And behavioural science helps us understand and unpick that. And so, I like to think one of the traits that I've learned, I'm not saying this is something that was innate to me, but it's something I've learned from some of the values I've got from behavioural science, is, it's not necessarily that I understand people better than other people, but I think it's at a really fundamental level, it really helps you be empathetic and understand why people might be behaving in certain ways. I recognise, one of the examples I draw in my book, for example, is that, if you're thinking about managing people in a business context, you recognise that that you are managing people, and we all have things in our lives that are affecting our behaviour for positive and negative reasons. And if you have someone in your team, for example, who has consistently been a brilliant performer at a high level, and then suddenly that performance drops off, something's happened.
Something's going on.
Something's got to happen, whether it's outside of work or inside of work, to affect that. And it's not that suddenly someone has just become a bad employee, or is not performing in that job. And your role as a manager or a leader is to try and unpick that, and as far as you try to help resolve that, whatever it might be. Obviously, sometimes you want something outside of work which you can't resolve. What you can do is you can give people space, give them time off, give them whatever they need, to help with that, so that they can, their performance can then get back to where it wants to be, where it wants to be. But those human aspects, and then unfortunately, I'm sure you probably have the same example. There's been plenty of instances I've seen in my career where people are just like, why do you cancel them? But then
immediately dismiss it.
That it's down in the biases that we have can get. I guess it's those two things, and one, recognizing the importance of context on behaviour.
Yeah.
And there's a thing in behavioural science called psychological fundamental attribution error, which is that we can often think what we can say what people do reflects who they are.
Yes.
Whereas actually, because we are driven by context, because there are factors outside of our control that influence our behaviour, that's not always the case. Again, example is my book, someone turns up late for an interview. That could be a while. It could have been a disaster that happened. You shouldn't, in an interview, you can go, well, they're obviously going consistently late, so we won't give them a job. It's not a representative example.
We're quick to draw conclusions.
Quick to judge.
I think that's a lovely choice. And I'm imagining that you are naturally very empathetic, and then perhaps your study of behavioural science has taken that to a further level, perhaps.
I think absolutely. I mean, I'd hope I'd always had that to a degree, but I think it now just reinforces the value of that and the importance of it, and I think it's fun that at basic level it's about understanding that I have my own biases as much as anyone else. Sometimes people I think have a misconception when they say, "Oh, well, because you're an expert in this stuff, you must be able to make totally rational, choice maximising every decision you make." Oh no, it doesn't work like that. However aware I am of my own biases, they're still there, and they still lead me to behave in ways that.
You are only human, Richard.
Indeed. And I think that's the key point as well, is recognizing that they are only human, that they're vulnerable, and not being demanding yourself about it.
Yeah, and I think so. And I mean, I talked about not getting into to this, but part of your perspective, as I took it on AI, is therein lies an opportunity for us to lean further into what makes us human, and it's probably traits like empathy, curiosity, creativity, where we still stand apart from the brilliance of AI, that we should find more, use AI to allow us to focus more on that. I think is a message in the book, again, which I felt very much buoyed by, and I think your choice of empathy as a notable human characteristic is completely at the heart of that. So it ties things nicely together.
100%. And as you say, that is something that's uniquely human that AI-based tools can't replicate, and maybe never will. So, when we talk about, sure, there are lots and lots of things that AI can do better than humans. And when we talk about the jobs that will be lost as a result of it, for example, that is going to happen. I don't believe it will be the same scale that some people are predicting. That is going to happen, but what it means is the jobs that are left for the rest of us, for the humans,
the human jobs,
are going to be unique human jobs where empathy, creativity, those unique human traits are absolutely critical. And so those of us who have that understanding around it and have those skills will benefit. And And so I kind of, I'm cautiously optimistic about the opportunities, and particularly working for an organisation that do now where we have that combination of the tech capabilities and being a human-centered organisation as well. As part of the reason why I'm here. I think we're quite, we're uniquely close to benefit from that. And to benefit our clients from it. So that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. But as always, with any technology, can be used for good or ill. So
but I think any glimmer of a brighter future amongst a lot of the doomsaying, I think, is very welcome, and I can see that there's a strong case for the direction you're suggesting actually becoming a reality.
I hope so. No.
One of many genuinely fascinating things that we've covered. I think if I was to go back to university, behavioural science would certainly be a subject that I would be interested in exploring. Your book's given me a taste. The conversation has, as I said at the outset, I love how it supports what we have observed as a creative agency working predominantly with B2B, and I think it's just reinforcing that some of those themes that equally we can then encourage our clients to further embrace. It's been terrific, Richard, and I will again, for anyone watching, it's the Behaviour Business. Highly recommend, worth the read. And hopefully this conversation gave people a nice insight into the quality of that content as well.
Really, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Many thanks, Richard. Big thanks once again to Richard for a conversation rich in insight and thought-provoking ideas. So rich, in fact, it's a challenge to summarise, but here are some of my key takeaways. The central thread to much of what we discussed is the reality that, contrary to how they might be perceived, B2B buyers are not emotionless robots. In fact, there is good reason to believe, and even evidence to suggest, that typically there is a greater emotional element involved in purchasing in a B2B context than there is in B2C, largely due to there being more at stake personally for the individual, something I suspect that may be somewhat of a surprise for many people. Then there was the notion of the good enough decision. In most situations, buyers are choice satisficing rather than maximizing. In other words, they will be comfortable with a solution they consider good enough. The implication for B2B brands is that they should be identifying the 2 or 3 criteria that matter most to their buyer and clearly demonstrating how they can meet them. Too much information or too many options can overwhelm and make your prospect less likely to purchase. Tied in with that idea, B2B brands can help potential buyers make those good enough decisions through the use of heuristics or mental shortcuts, often in the form of distinctive brand assets that build positive associations and shape perceptions over time. Music to my ears was confirmation of the power and value of creativity. It's always helpful to have a big budget, but when all else is equal, it's creativity and its ability to drive distinctiveness that makes the difference. And lastly, we had a healthy reminder that as smart as AI is, it can't, at least not yet, and perhaps never will be able to, replace what is uniquely human. And if that means, as a species, we lean more into the likes of empathy, care, curiosity, and creativity, then surely that can only be a good thing. That's it for this episode. I hope it was good enough for you, and that you'll be joining us again for the next one. Bye for now.